Okay, I've started the recording. Welcome to the IGRI's May research seminar. My name is Uta Brady. I am a postdoctoral scholar at Arizona State University, and I'm also IGRI's associate director, and I'm organize these seminars. If you know anybody or you're interested in presenting, please come see me or email me. Before we get started today, well, first of all, we have a small group today, but I see many familiar faces. Thanks for showing up. I don't have any announcements today, but I wanted to check in with Saba and Christopher, who are the co-directors of IGRI, to see if they have anything that they wanted to share with the group.
Hi, thank you. Oh,
I was just going to say maybe your new book.
Oh, right. Yes, I guess we can announce that as well. We're very grateful that Palgrave Macmillan has published a new text by Christopher and myself on the institutional grammar. It's called the Institutional Grammar: Foundations and Applications for Institutional Analysis. And this provides a comprehensive overview of the IG, and particularly the IG 2.0, which many of you know we have been developing over some time. And in addition to providing a sort of conceptual backdrop of the IG 2.0, there's also operational guidance included there in terms of how to actually go about coding institutions with the IG 2.0 and how to analyze the data that result from IG 2.0 coding. So you can find some information about that. I'll put it in the chat. But that was actually not what I had planned to say. What I wanted to remind you all of is that we have a conference happening in June. And irrespective of whether you've submitted something for the conference, an abstract, you're all most welcome to attend that conference. It's open to the public. Just register for it, and please join us for some virtual sessions over a few days. We'll also put a link in there for the conference, in the chat for the conference. And then finally, we do have an IG training coming up as well. As we did last year, we have a multi-week training on institutional analysis and the IG 2.0. The registration for that, I guess the registration deadline has passed, but if you are interested in attending that, we can make an exception for you, of course, happily. Just email one of us and we'll get you all set up. We have a few live sessions coming up every week for the next several weeks on Friday from 11. What is the timing? 10 to 12, is it? 11 to 1? 11 to 1.
11 to 1, yeah.
Eastern time, New York time, we'll be doing a live session where people can get sort of hands-on training, hands-on experience with coding. So anyway, just a few announcements there, but I don't want to distract from Giulia's presentation, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Saba, and congratulations, Saba and Christopher, on the book. Lots of work went into that, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so without any further ado, let's introduce today's speaker, Giulia Bazzan from the University of Copenhagen. She's a postdoctoral scholar there in the Department of Food and Resource Economics, and she's going to be talking about the application of the IG 2.0 to take a configural perspective of the EU's Green Deal, which is much further along than the one over here in the US. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be here to present my research. I have to say, just as short premise, that it's very much a work in progress. I'm very looking forward also to hear any suggestions or inputs or feedback that you may have on this. Yeah, so I would just start my presentation. So just to give you a little bit of background of what has been my starting point to address the topic of the European Union Green Deal. Well, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but I've started actually from the concept of agri-food systems. And when we talk about agri-food systems, we are talking about complex sets of actually intertwined activities, actors, and outcome that are within the food chain from production to consumption of food. And this system is often associated with actually a diversity of sustainability problems that are lying at the interface of food, environmental security, and social welfare. And just to give you an idea, in the European Union, actually 33 million people cannot afford a quality meal every second day. So next to this, there's also the problem that agricultural practices and food chain related activities make actually a major contribution to air, soil and water pollution, and also to greenhouse gas emissions. And so you can imagine how they have a deep impact on natural resources, biodiversity, and also, of course, the environment. And next to this, there's the problem that additional pressures can actually exacerbate these problems. So, for instance, migration, climate change, induced floods and pandemics, as we saw in the past 2 years. So in response to these challenges that are associated with food systems, in December 2019, 11 December, the European Commission adopted a communication on the European Green Deal. And this communication has been an attempt by the Commission to actually reset its commitment to tackle climate and environmental related challenges, and to try to set out also a number of related strategies to that. So the farm to fork strategy, but also a biodiversity strategy, a proposal for a climate law, and a new action plan for circular economy. So the European Union Green Deal in this respect is trying to be some sort of umbrella for all these kind of more specific strategies and initiatives at the EU level. And the starting point is that, of course, decisions about how to structure and implement such European Union Green Deal and related strategies can have a significant impact on their eventual success or failure in support a shift towards a more sustainable food system across the European Union. And so starting from this, well, as you are all familiar with that, there's a consolidated literature that is offering a systematic approach to analyze policy designs and to understand how actually the institutional constraints, so how these policy designs are structured and then eventually implemented can affect policy outcomes. And that is grounded in institutional analysis and development framework, and particularly in the concept of action situation, which is where, of course, you all know, actions and interactions are taking place. And that's been my conceptual background actually to do this analysis. And in particularly, I've been drawn upon the one of the main assumptions of the framework, that is that the institutions have a configurational nature. And so when we study them, and when we study them in particularly within policy design analysis, we can actually explore configurations of institutions. And in particular, there's the concept of rules, and the framework is offering this typology that is actually classifying the institutional rules into 7 types. We have boundary rules, position rules, choice rules, aggregation rules, information, and payoff and scope. And these rules actually operate, as I said, in a configurational way to actually guide the behavior, individual and collective behavior that is occurring within the action situation space. And next to this approach that we could say is some sort of, I would say, meso approach, in the sense that enables us to classify the rules, so the institutional statements, into these categories. We also have, of course, the micro approach, that is the one that enables us to dissecting these institutional statements into their syntactic components. And again, of course, you all know how this developed over time. But just to give you an idea, so I've started, of course, from the original, let's say, IG1, so the ADICO syntax, and then it has been enriched over the years with the object component. So we then had the ABDICO, and then the nested ADICO, so the NEDICO. And very recently we had this very nice development, which is the IGRI 2.0. And my attempt has been to try to actually apply the institutional grammar 2.0 to the policy design of the European Union Green Deal. And in particularly, the richness and the new, this latest conceptualization of the institutional grammar is providing us with a richer, actually, institutional representation, because it also recognizes not just the regulative statements, but also two kinds of institutional statements. On the one hand, we have the regulative ones, but also the constitutive ones. And if we take the definition actually of constitutive statements, they're actually helping us because they kind of parameterize the features of the institutional system within a particular context. And in so doing, what they are enabling us to do, and what's enabled me to do with this analysis, was actually to not being forced, let's say, to disregard some parts of the text that in the previous version we had to, because they were just the introductory definitions or the preambles in the particularly within policy designs, texts and laws in particular. And the constitutive syntax actually differs from the regulative syntax, of course. So I've been also trying to apply this and to dissect the statements into their components. So the general structure that all the constitutive statements have is the specification of what is called a constituted entity. That is defined, modified, or otherwise affected by the institutional statement. Then we have constituting properties, which specify the content of the parameterization that the entity is doing. And then we have the constitutive function, which qualifies the link of a constituted entity with the institutional setting, or where existing with constituting properties. And the context can be actually further specified into activation conditions, and so we can even dissect it even more in depth. And we have execution constraints that further qualify the constitutive function, and also the modal component, which indicates if the constitution is expressed that is expressed in the statement is optional, or if it's required. And finally, we also have the or else component that is the same as the regulative statements and qualifies the consequences for the non-fulfillment. So I've been drawn upon this distinction, so between regulative and constitutive statements and their different syntactic components. But also on the distinction between rules, norms, and strategies. And I have attempted also to classify and to use this distinction not just for the regulative statements, but also for the constitutives. And as I said at the beginning, there's been quite some development in the application of the institutional grammar to policy designs. And this can be actually, so the protocol, let's say, that can be applied, can be, I've followed in doing that, these four steps. So in assessing the European Union Green Deal policy design, I have followed the latest conceptualization, as I said, and also the approach that was introduced and applied by Bazzurto and his colleagues, and also, of course, the Siddiqui and colleagues and Carter and colleagues. And in doing so, I've followed these four steps. So in a first step, I have deconstructed the policy textual content into institutional statements, and I have distinguished between regulative and constitutional and constitutive, sorry. And then in a second step, I have identified the respective syntactic components particularly focusing on aims, attributes, and conditions in the regulative statements, and on functions, entities, and contexts in constitutive statements. And then in a third step, I have distinguished between the rules and the strategies, and I have classified the rules based on the original framework rule typology. And finally, I have attempted to reconstruct institutional statements according to the action situation that they intend to structure and affect, and of which they intend to affect, of course, the outcomes. So to just give you an idea, so this is just very descriptive, but to show some preliminary insights on my analysis of the European Union Green Deal. Well, I have first distinguished, as I said, between constitutive and regulative statements. So you can see that actually the majority of the statements in the European Union Green Deal communication are constitutive statements, because there are 352 over 153 regulative statements. And then I have, as I said, I have attempted also to then distinguish within the constitutive statements on one hand and the regulative statements on the other, to distinguish between strategies and rules. And in this respect, I noticed that strategies are actually the majority of the statements, both between constitutive and between the regulative, and not just because, as we know, the or else component is often nested somewhere else and is often let's say a separate statement per se, but also because the deontic often was missing, and so it was just as I said, yeah, so just a strategy could be classified. Most of the statements could be classified as strategies. And then in a second step, as I said, I tried to look into the syntactic components of the different statements. And so looking into more detail into the constitutive statements in the European Union Green Deal, I have tried to see which were the most frequently occurring informations there. So in terms of constituted entity, actually the European Union, so the EU, is the most frequently occurring one with the 13 statements, followed by the European Green Deal with 10 statements. And then I've also reported some of the other most frequent information, just because there was not much difference in terms of occurrences. For instance, the biodiversity strategy, the circular economy action plan, the commission, the from farm to fork strategy, and this communication. And I think that's one of the most interesting, perhaps, insights with respect to this. And I think that's also reflecting on the fact that most of the statements were actually constitutive per se, is the fact that the constituted entity itself is the European Union, and that's the most occurring one. And I think that's already telling, despite the fact it's just mere description here, but I think that's already telling us something about the content of this and how this, specifically this communication and the related strategies, are actually structured and designed. And with respect to the modal, that was the most occurring one in the constitutive statements, we had should as the most frequent one with 25 occurrences, and then can as the second one with 13 occurrences. And then we had could and must. So there was not much, let's say, diversity in the use of very different models, but still I think it's also relevant and interesting to see that should is the most occurring one, followed then by can. So we have on the one hand let's say an obligation, and then on the other we have a possibility that is actually prescribed by these statements. And then finally, as to the constitutive function, to be declined. So I have decided to report here. So I'm reporting it as to be, but then of course it was declined in the very different how do you say, like, depending on which was the entity, of course, then the verb was declined differently. But still, to be is the constitutive function that appeared the most, and it was with 59 occurrences. And then I explicitly decided to report here in a separate count the future tense, and that's because 13 times we had a will be. And I think that's, again, this is relevant for the study of this specific policy design and this specific communication. So it was mostly, let's say, an empirically driven choice, in the sense that I think that's relevant for the story that that I'm trying to reconstruct here, thanks to this analytical tool. And then two other constitutive functions that were most occurring were to require and then will help. And again, I also, perhaps it's one of the next slides, I will tell you more later. And then I've done the same for the regulative statements. So I have done the same kind of analysis, but of course with the other syntactic components. So on the one hand, the attributes, and then the deontic and the aim. And so the most occurring, most frequent attribute is decommission with 116 occurrences, followed by DU with 21. And again, this is also interesting with respect to the actors and the participants that are involved in this action situation, of course. And I think that's also relevant, the fact that here the most occurring one with 116, so the majority, actually really the majority of the regulative statements in the communication have the commission as attribute. And that is mostly I think for two reasons. The first one is the fact that, of course, the commission is the one who is setting out this communication, and at the same time is also the one that is so also, let's say, designing the using institutional analysis language, I would say, shaping the nested action situations that are following to this one, because the European Commission is setting out this communication as a broader framework and also the related strategies to that. And so in this respect, I think it's highly relevant, the fact that the Commission is actually the most occurring attribute, especially for these regulative statements. And again, followed by the European Union. And while in the first case, the European Union appeared as the most occurring entity for the constitutive statements, and that's mostly because of the fact that, of course, there are many definitions in the Commission, and many statements that are basically stating facts. So so contextual, let's say, information related to how the EU in general is actually dealing with this kind of challenges, sustainability challenges, and what are the steps that needs to be taken. Here rather is more about what the European Union is going to do actually to implement this communication. And as to the deontic, just briefly, so should and must are the two most frequent occurring deontics, and that's again another interesting piece of information for the empirical case, because we see we don't have the possibility there; it's just the prescription. And as to the aim, I also wanted to underline that both the most frequently occurring aims are in the future tense, and that's will propose on the one hand and will work on the other. Again, so these are not full rules. Actually, they are strategies, of course, but these were the most occurring aims. Yes, but I also just wanted to quickly, because what I've done was not just to look into the two different, so the different, let's say, syntactic components individually, but also looking at how they combine with each other, let's say. So to out of the sorry, I'm trying to, yes, to check that on the paper. So looking at the patterns of institutional information that I have assessed with multiple syntactic components, the Commission will propose is the most frequently occurring actor-action linkage, and that is occurring 19 times. While there is actually not really attributes deontic aim, nor constituted entity, modal, and constitutive function recurring linkage. And that's because, as I said here, for instance, these aims are associated with strategies, while the deontics are associated with rules, so they were not occurring in relation with each other. And then as a further step, I've attempted to actually reconstruct the action situation according to the rule typology. And so I've tried to classify the rules according to the original 7 rule typology. But actually, this is still a step. It's still very much work in progress in this respect, because what I did was really only to focus on the rules in the most complete meaning that we could give to it. So I've only classified those statements that had all the syntactic components present, and so there were not many. So most of them are choice rules, as actually kind of expected, and then followed just by 3 position rules, 2 information, 2 aggregation, and 2 scope rules. So I think that in terms of insights and lessons that we could draw from this, there's not much yet. I would like then in a further step to, of course, try to classify also all the other statements and see, because I'm pretty sure that that would change quite extensively than the broader picture in the attempt of reconstructing the action situation. And so just to conclude, what are the next steps that I would like to take? So as you heard from my presentation, actually I've focused mostly now on what is called IG core in the new IG 2.0 in the new version of the IG. But I would also then like to extend the analysis also to the IG extended and the IG logical. So that would be a first step, again, still on the European Union Green Deal communication. And then, because I'm not just interested into this specific policy design, but as I said, I'm already foreseeing this nesting with other action situations, and in particular with the related strategies that the Commission is setting out to actually address these sustainability challenges. I would also like to apply the same analysis also to the farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. And there I would, I have outlined here some of the expectations that I would have. I would still expect from both of these strategies to have a predominance actually of strategies in the IG definition and constitutive statements. And that's because, again, we are talking about European Union strategies that are not binding. And so the amount of regulative statements prescribing obligations or permissions or whatever with deontics, I would expect them to be less rather than the constitutive ones. And then in a further step, this analysis of the nested action situations, but also not just, let's say, in an horizontal way, so looking at the European Union Green Deal communication and these related strategies, but also at I would like to further use this and explore the national strategic plans. And this is related with the new common agricultural policy, and that's something that is very much related with the European Union Green Deal. As I said, this communication is kind of an umbrella for trying to address this sustainability challenge across the EU. But we all know that the common agricultural policy is actually one of the main pillars of the actually European Union policies, and has a huge implications and huge impact on this, on how we can address this sustainability challenge. And so it's very much related to that. And the new common agricultural policy is prescribing the member states to hand in national strategic plans in which they actually structure and implement their national strategies. And so I would expect then to, and I would like to then further explore these operational action situations of the different member states. And so the final step would be to conduct a comparative analysis across the different member states. So that's all, I think. So thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to engage in a discussion with you. So thanks.
Thank you, Giulia. Excellent presentation. Questions for Giulia? Renata.
Thank you, Ute. Thank you very much, Giulia. Really interesting presentation and work. I have 2 questions. Maybe I was reading again your abstract to see if I missed that. Do you have at this stage a concrete research question? I'm just asking this, really, I just want to understand and learn more. Do you have already a more concrete research question? And the second would be, I'm interested in what you learned about how the IG tool helped you to identify the action situations, because you mentioned that one of your goals was to reconstruct the action situations, and then I saw that you found a lot of choice rules, which from my understanding, if I don't remind, they point very much to the action and action situations. Please, anyone correct me. And so I wanted to know if, were you able to identify the nested action situations through application, through using the rule typology, or do you have already an action situation in mind that you want to understand further?
Okay, thank you, Renata, for the very interesting questions. And I would start from this latter, actually. So, well, let's say that I don't have an answer yet, in the sense that that's something that, because in my original plan, there was this idea then as a final step to reconstruct the action situation using the rule typology. But this is something, as I said, that I'm still working on, in the sense that having so many actually strategies rather than norms and rules in the policy design, so in the text. I have started from the complete rules. So I've started from those statements that had all the components present to try to reconstruct and classify them according to the rule typology. But those were very few. And I'm still in the process now of coding also all the other statements, starting from the norms, so those who have the deontic, but maybe the or else is either not present or is somewhere else, and I'm still trying to then reconnect them in one unique rule, so I'm still in the process of coding that. But to answer to your question, so that I think that very much depends on what is your unit of analysis, in a sense. So because it's not the first time I'm applying the IGT, it's the first time I'm applying the IG 2.0, of course. But in doing that, what I always try to do was to maybe have first some expectations of what my action situation, so what my unit of analysis would be, and then go into the policy design analysis, having already some expectations with respect to that. So for the way I see it, but I would be happy also to discuss with the others if that is maybe not the case. From my perspective, the policy design itself, so the European Union Green Deal in this case, would be my action situation. So that would be my unit of analysis. And then let's say the broad one that I would try to reconstruct after I have dissected first the institutional statements into constitutive and regulative, and then the individual components. So in this, the rule types would help me in reconstructing this broader action situation. Even though I recognize that there may be, I mean, someone could argue that there may be different action situations within the same policy designs, of course. So I think it's also very much context specific. In this case, considering the length of the test, the nature of the text, and so how this text has also been developed. So this communication itself has been developed and structured. I'm quite confident in saying that I would consider that as one action situation. And in this identification of nested action situations, that's actually something that, as I said, I can already kind of foresee that happening with these related strategies that the Commission is mentioning. So they are mentioned there, and that's, I think, where the link is. But then if you want to look into but then it's not there that these nested action situations are actually specified, because I would then expect them, of course, to be specified into the, for instance, farm to form strategy or farm to fork strategy, or the biodiversity strategy, for instance, in this case. But I recognize, I acknowledge the fact that there could be some diversity depending on the policy design that you are trying to analyze. And to go to your first question regarding the research question, actually, at the moment, I don't really have, let's say, a specific research question yet. So it was much of an exploratory analysis in the attempt of applying this IGRI 2.0, so the updated version of the institutional grammar. But still, I would say that the starting point for this is the fact that I think that how these policy designs are structured and how they will be then implemented can actually affect policy outcomes. And so the ultimate step would be to try to then reconnect this, so the policy design with the outcomes, and see whether I would expect to be a relation, of course, between them, but also which kind of relation then there would be. But that's a bit beyond the scope of this first, let's say, exploratory analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Giulia. Any other questions? Follow up to that? Christopher?
Anyone else first, please, but I'm too excited. I can't wait for longer. In any case, Giulia, brilliant again. In fact, I'm cheating here. I watched it twice already, so I have a head start here. So I know a bit of the content already, but I probably needed it because it's quite dense what you present in the first place, actually. Especially since it's exploratory. There's so many different pathways and questions you could really ask. So, and I think upon every presentation you will get a different set of questions, even though the audience may be the same. Few comments. I think you answered it more, but I just want to kind of reinforce that intuition that you're having. You know, depending on the level of governance in the EU is a perfect example of this, right? Having a EU level strategy, national strategy, and so on. I think you are probably onto something in terms of expecting very different distributions of statement types, even if you just look at statement types, right? That you incrementally move from a really, and I think you need to look at the distribution in particular, from a very constitutive heavy to a much more, well, I'll say it with caution, yeah, but like parity between regulative and constitutive statements, right? So not so much that the constitutive statements would be crowded out in any way or another, but rather that there would be complementary regulative statements that offer concrete guidance, for instance, right, on an actor that is defined, constrained, or otherwise, parameterized, as one could put it, by a more general constitutive statement. I think this would be really interesting to pursue this kind of analysis further, basically drill down by kind of all different dimensions and kind of groupings and clusterings that you will have. So that will be interesting to see across the policy design. But the other question is also, can you perhaps distinguish level of design and just intuition while you were talking from maturity of policy? So the suggestion could be the lack of specificity in a given policy at the same level could suggest that, for instance, I mean, in the absence of sufficient regulation in terms in a regulative sense, could be indicative of a lack of maturity of the policy, you know, so to some extent also signaling that there's a further iteration process, you know, necessary, and perhaps even point you to possible shortcomings of the strategy in the long term. So you can also anticipate. Those are the kind of statements or areas I need to look at again, because I suspect there will be too many loopholes in this particular area. The intuition comes to some extent because we have recently been looking at cybersecurity policy of the EU, and the same kind of pattern was there as well. There was very promising policy, but a lot of loopholes that can probably, or could have been possibly anticipated reasonably early. So in this light, I think your analysis and looking at the relationship between constitutive and regulative would be quite useful. The other point is in your the quantitative overview of the constitutive coding, right? You identified it as we expected, I guess, the kind of definition, or the to be, in any case, the infinitive, to be the most prominent constitutive function. Question there is, or a suggestion, possibly more than question, is twofold, to kind of really attempt to qualify constitutive functions further, because chances are you analyze any policy and you have the same distribution on the constitutive side, because definitions will basically crowd out many of the other possible characterization or categories of constitutive functions in a way. The IG recognizes, you know, different forms of constitutive functions, such as being a definition, a relationship definition, something consists of something else, conferral of status, for instance, and so on. And those are the interesting ones, essentially, right? So it could be interesting to kind of selectively filter the expected or anticipated dominance of the definitions, because by definition they're in section 2. Oh, that was a bit of a, anyway, you get the point. So if you could filter those based for the analysis, there could be a lot more richer nuance coming out suddenly that is obviously hidden on the constitutive side. So that's something that is to be perhaps reflected. And the last one is just a question. And in fact, they were all kind of, I don't know, suggestion questions. I don't know what it is. But the last one was basically, did you consider in your identification of the different rule types kind of regulative and constitutive statements, or both, or did you consider to do it separately for both, or what's the because that was the last kind of analysis you showed, the pie chart. Be interesting to know how you approach this, but overall it's really promising to see what you can leverage from this, let alone the reconstruction idea, even though you said you're not quite there, but I'm looking excitedly to see, I'm excited to see how you approach this from that perspective, perhaps more comments later. So that's it from my side, so let's see.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your thoughts, inputs. Just to, yes, so one thing I wanted to say, because yes, I think that you're right regarding the level of governance and expecting also different distribution of the rule types, and also with what also Renato was saying about this majority, let's say, of choice rules. That's something that on the one hand, we can kind of, at least from my perspective, we can kind of expect, right, that when you have this kind of designs, often it's just prescribing some sort of actions and how the actions should or may take place within the action situation. And that is one thing, and that's especially related when you have operational, so rules that are insisting upon operational action situations. Another interesting aspect, and I think you are perfectly right regarding the also interaction, let's say in a sense, between regulative and constitutive statements, is that specifically in this communication, it's actually, if you look at the mere structure of the communication, it's divided in different subsections. And I already noticed a pattern there, and that's something that also I have to figure out how to actually let's say, describe that, because at the beginning of every subparagraph or paragraph, you have of course, you have the constitutive statements in which, so it's not just about what we would expect, for instance, in a law in which all the definitions come at the beginning and then you have all the prescriptions afterwards. But here, because it's a communication and it's divided in different sections, every section has first some constitutive statements in which, and more than just mere definitions, I would say it's also a lot about contextual information. So, for example, tackling the different aspects of this sustainability challenge. So the different aspects related with, I don't know, reducing GHG emissions, or the farm to fork, because also these related strategies are mentioned there. And so what else, what should be tackled by these related strategies? And in this respect, I think that one of the next step could also, now I'm thinking out loud, could also be like to see whether this action situation is also prescribing some and has implications for the next ones in the vertical level. And so, as you said, distinguishing the level of design. So the specificity in a given policy may lack maturity of the policy, and the lacking of maturity of the policy. I think that's exactly what is happening here. And that's because much of the work is actually delegated somehow to the related strategies first, and then to the member states in this, for instance, strategic plans, because it's something that is also within the communication. The Commission explicitly said that this communication and this European Union Green Deal is to be related with the other strategies, but also with the common agricultural policy and the national strategic plans. So I think that that's definitely, there's definitely a lack perhaps of regulation in the so the regulative component here, but I think it's mostly related with how this communication is, so what's also the purpose and the aim of this communication itself. And that of course complicates things, because I think that then it remains a big open question of whether actually then this sustainability challenge will be actually tackled, because this communication is not answering to this at least in my view. So it's true, it's very ambitious, but then we have to see how then the actual regulative statements and the operational action situations at a lower level of governance is going to do that. And yeah, I think that's really a good suggestion, the one to actually qualify the constitutive function further, and that's something I will definitely do, especially trying to filter depending on whether it's a definition, relationship, or states, etc. And in the reconstruction actually of the rules, if I consider the distinction between regulative and constitutive, well, I have to say that for now I've just done that for the regulative statements, but that's because for the constitutive statements, and that's also a question that I would have for you and for Saba maybe, because I found challenging when classifying the constitutive statements was, okay, when they are actually stating some facts, they are classified as rules, because you refined also the conceptualization and the distinction between rules and strategies, if I'm not wrong, or yeah. So that's been a bit of a challenging step for me. So I have actually classified these statements of facts as rules, but then that's something that it's a little bit more difficult than to kind of reclassify them into the typology, because they are not exactly having deontics or else, or it's more, this is a matter of fact, and and it's just stating a fact. So I understand it's a rule, but it's not the same rule to which I would apply the rule typology. So in this respect, that's also where probably I'm still a bit stuck. But yeah, maybe you have some, yeah, you can help me in this.
If I may offer a immediate response, I mean, please, Ute, feel free to mute me. But Yes, I think for your analysis, I think I would forgo the statement of fact as part of the characterization first, because yeah, they literally convey an instance of information or and so on that is conveyed and could be characterized, but they probably could confuse it. But the more interesting aspect is, because that's an outstanding issue in terms of IG in the first place, is to what extent can or does the rule typology as it's applied to a regulative statement, also apply to constitutive statements, right? Or is there a certain bias or bends? For instance, we expect the predominant application that was anticipated of the choice rule, of course, for regulative statements, you know, in as far as the single and actor's choice, of course. But what happens on the constitutive side, right? If you think about position rules, I think they could be much more naturally be associated with constitutive structure. So I think stepping away from perhaps this particular concern, but on the higher level to look at perhaps there is an opportunity to establish perhaps even a more or less, who knows, reliable classification of institutional statements as those types, because that hasn't been done much in practice in the first place. So you're actually venturing into new territory. And I think this would be really interesting to see if there's correlative patterns. You know, what distribution types do we have on ConReg, whatever. So with respective types, but then also, of course, in aggregate form. So you can kind of recompose and aggregate or re-aggregate basically this analysis. And I think that would just be insightful, and then a great opportunity to see what additional novel insights we actually can draw from there. And but they also identify to what extent is it actually a true characterization of an action situation, generally expressed in terms of regulative and constitutive statements, and to what extent is it just expressive style, let's say, as prescribed by the style guides for European Union, because they may diverge from other kind of legislative bodies of, in terms of their conventions. So that's probably also something to see if it's just that you picked up on a linguistic pattern or a true institutional pattern there. But if that was the case, then the aggregation would resolve it, because then it wouldn't matter anymore whether it's expressed in constitutive regulative terms, if it's, for instance, a position rule. Anyway, but sounds exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. I think that's exactly the direction. It was actually my starting point, because as I've applied in the past the IAD, I've been working much with the concept of action situation itself and the rule typology. And so that was my starting point. Then I went, of course, in dissecting everything, so in more in depth. But then it's also the ultimate step that I would like to take. So that's definitely a direction that that I think it's worth further exploration. Yeah. So I will do that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Giulia, did you get all your questions answered, or do you have any specifics that you wanted to address with the group?
No, I think I had a lot of food for thought. So thanks a lot for your inputs. And yes, then maybe in the future we can discuss a further version of this. As I said, it's very much a work in progress, but I think that's exactly what also the purpose of this seminar is, to try to get inputs and feedback on how to advance on this. Yeah. So yeah, I'd then also be happy maybe to share with the community what I will be doing. Great.
If I may, so just a question, Giulia. Is it? I mean, the way that sounds, you have you position this as a like kind of a longitudinal study in one way or another, right? So you basically, I mean, you're now basically waiting for 27 parliaments. I think they're still depending, perhaps in 2 years less, who knows? But in any case, you're waiting them for coming up with their national strategies and kind of recording, so you can really make this an interesting exercise to kind of also not only look at the vertical perspective in how far, let's say, EU level policy trickles down to national and below level, possibly federal level, but also then the temporal dimension to see kind of dynamics and how far, strategies possibly refined as in terms of a feedback cycle based on this individual strategies and so on. So I think that really makes, you mentioned basically, I'm coming back and talking about it later, my counter response would be, yeah, you have to, because it seems to me very much the nature and the obvious path to go with this kind of research you're proposing, especially if you want to do a comparative study and then again have the temporal component embedded. So a lot of work ahead of you, but I think you picked a really interesting problem there.
Yeah, thank you. And just quick response into this. Yes, I mean, because for now, for instance, the member states already drafted their national plans, and they are now in the process of discussing with the Commission, like the Commission released some recommendations to them on how to improve this. So there could even be not just 27 plans, but actually multiple versions of the 27 plans. But I still need to figure out how to actually tackle all of that. But yeah. So I really imagine this as a multiple step, of course, research that I will be conducting, I think, for the next years probably. So yeah, but that's the idea. And ultimately, I don't know if I mean, probably not all of you know, but I'm a comparative public policy scholar, and I usually apply configurational comparative methods, particularly QCA. So that would also be my ultimate aim then, to use QCA to actually compare these policy designs of the member states. But let's see how far I can get, because that seems to be quite a big challenge already. So yeah.
Thank you, Giulia, for sharing your interesting work. It was really very insightful. Thanks for your time. And any more follow-up or final questions before we close the seminar? Nothing except saying thank you. Big thank you to Giulia for being here and sharing her work.
Thanks a lot to all of you for being here and your questions and your attention. Thank you. It was really nice.
Okay, we'll see you again in June.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.